It's easy to dive in too deep when it comes to art. After all, there are how many mediums, artistic programs, classes, YouTube videos, and books, and goodness, the books. So many resources you could pull from. So many things you could lean into. Many of us, perhaps most of us at one point or another, have fallen in too deep. Our dreams and expectations working in devilish tandem to pull us along a tightrope that most of us will inevitably fall off of. We start our projects and they grow. We start with a single page. Why not a sketchbook? A row of them? A book perhaps. Not a canvas painting, but a series. A wall? A mural? It is easy to let things spiral out of control, and yet projects are necessary. They help us, they guide us, they give us purpose in our work. But that razor's edge between the pit that swallows you whole and the guideline that pulls you forward, well, I suppose that's why we're here today. My name is Zach, and welcome to episode 76 of the podcast. Today we are discussing big projects, why you need them as an artist, but also how to choose and handle them in that process. Projects are great, and I might go out on a limb to even say they are necessary to long-term art health and your growth as an artist. As usual, I'm going to explore what I mean by the topic, then go over how this might actually affect you as an artist, though I'm going to start adding some of my own closing thoughts at the end, so please stay tuned for that. Feel free while we get started to check out the Discord and Patreon linked below. What is the largest project you have worked on in the last few years, or perhaps ever? Let us know in the comments below. It might be encouraging to someone else. Well, what do I mean by big projects? They can take on a lot of different forms for different people, and the idea of big is going to vary much depending on what you've done in the past, the amount of time you have to dedicate to it, and frankly, your attention span. For the sake of discussion though, let's define some things. A piece is an individual article of art, crafted by you as the artist. It is often capable of being done in a single sitting, though some pieces can stretch on for a long period of time. They often become projects at this point though, I might argue. The quintessential piece of art would be a small painting, a page in a sketchbook, a drawing for Inktober, or the product of a 1 to 4 hour long work session. A project, conversely, is a larger scale thing. It can be, and often is, a conglomeration of multiple pieces, perhaps a small series of paintings in the same train of thought, or an entire sketchbook treated as a homogeneous thing. Finishing a sketchbook could be a project, or a mural on a wall in your house. But a project can also be a gigantic, singular piece that consumes a tremendous amount of time, and generally is identified by requiring preparation, research, and often references. A novel is a project. The entirety of Inktober or Smogist or any month-long challenge is a project. I have done many pieces built up to many projects, but my heart is always in the large scale. I do the majority of my artwork in service to a project, even if most of my artwork are tiny little pieces, drawings of robots and dragons. Obviously, your definitions may vary, but it's good to at least know what we're talking about with common language as we go ahead and move on. Alright, in the breakdown here, we are going to touch on choosing a project, structuring one, working on said project, and then handling some of the issues that may arise. As we go through this, I'll be talking about some personal examples as well, as it might help with context, and if you are willing, please share some of your personal examples in the comments. This is often helpful for other artists as they listen along. So let's start with choosing a project. For many of you, this will actually be difficult because you have too many things to choose from. Not difficult in the sense that like, oh goodness, how am I going to do this? But more of a, how do I make up my mind because I'm excited about so many things. This would be me as well. I have a ton of ideas all the time, and picking just one to focus on is very difficult. However, here are some baseline considerations as you're sifting through ideas, or if you are the kind of person who's just struggling to come up with a project in the first place. What kinds of work do you enjoy? This could be focused on media specifically or subject matter, or it could be the length of time that you like to work on something. In general though, as an artist, look back on the time that you've spent recently. Maybe even look back on the golden age of your art. If you're a little older like me, maybe you've taken some time away from art and you can go back in your mind and find when you were in high school or college or afterwards, When you had free time, you were excited, maybe you were still really ambitious with that kind of childhood naivety, and you were super excited about things. But go back to the work that you enjoy. Figure out what it is, what kind of qualities it has, and then that will give you a little bit of a benchmark as you try to move forward. What mediums do you want to work with? A single or multiple? I find for me that using a project in a new medium is often a good way for me to learn how to operate in that medium, how to pull myself into that space. If you've done most of your work recently in one medium and you want to shift to another, that might be a really good idea. But this can also go back to that first point of what do you enjoy? If you don't enjoy paint at all, I would recommend not building a first project out of paint-based materials. Go back to something that brings you joy, something that you know will, be consistent for a long period of time, something that you can stick to. Perhaps revisit a large project that you've done in the past. What kinds of things have you done before that have worked? Conversely, what kinds of things have you done that haven't worked? I've tried to put together some really large-scale paintings in the past that, we got into the planning stages of and then backed away from because we got scared or it was just, the excitement wore off. It's one of those weird things where sometimes you can get the dopamine hit from planning and telling people that you're going to do a project, and then you don't have any dopamine left to get for actually doing the thing. So look back at the projects that you've both been successful with and those that you've failed at, and try to see what there is to glean there as you try to design a new one. If you've got a history of large project completion, it's probably easy to go find one of those that worked for you and just build off of that. Likewise, it's good to avoid the things that haven't worked in the past, unless this is a new version of you or you're really trying to double down on those things and fix something that you see in yourself. What manner of work do you admire? This is sometimes a little bit of tricky ground to get into, but generally, if there is an artist or a type of work that you really enjoy and admire, there's probably something about it that you could build into a project and mirror. I've really been enjoying some of the ink pieces that I've looked at recently that have been then taken in digitally and colored or have had watercolor done over the top of them. In fact, just this last weekend, I bought a book up in the mountains here in Colorado that had some really beautiful examples of this kind of illustration, and I'm going to use that as kind of a guidebook as I start embarking on a little bit of new and different art for me, stuff that I haven't done in a very, very long time. But often you can find the stuff that you admire, the stuff that you look up to, and you can use that to kind of help propel you forward. It's not a good idea to copy anything outright, but it can often be really, really smart to take something that you already like the appearance of and see how you can do a lesser version of that. What is your time frame? If you're looking to have a project that you can do over the course of 1 week versus 1 year, obviously those are very drastically different things. And those are pretty extreme examples. If you're looking at a general project, I would say try to build something between 6 and 8 weeks long. It's a reasonable amount of time, hopefully not so much time that you're going to lose track of things or lose motivation, but it's long enough that you could actually accomplish something pretty tremendous. And I think one of the biggest aspects and benefits of finishing large projects is the boost to your ego and your self-esteem and your confidence as an artist. And lastly, what is the purpose behind the project itself? Do you have a desire to do this project because you feel like you should? Well, that's a very different thing than it's something that you really want to do or something that has, hung over your head as a desire for a very long time. For some of you, it's going to be to prove that you can do something, prove to yourself or prove to others. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have either of those as your motivation, but it's good to know, kind of where your anchor point is. Maybe it's to put something together so you can put it in your portfolio or as part of your resume. This is also a pretty decent reason, but sometimes the project is just for joy. You want to have done the thing, or you want to spend the time putting something together so you can look back on it and be like, this is so cool, I'm so happy I did that. None of these are good or bad reasons, but I do feel like you are going to get some benefit out of knowing exactly why you want to do what you want to do. All of this should help you come up with something that fits you. I know all of this has been structured specifically for you as the artist to be introspective, to think about yourself, but if you need some more specifics to help you choose, try this. Design a project just outside your current skill level, but not too far. That's the first thing. Then, make sure it is tailored toward your desires and the things that you enjoy and are inspired by, both in technique and subject matter. Keep the scope and scale reasonable, something that can be done in about a month, allowing some bleed over if need be. Tell 1 or 2 people so you have some amount of accountability, and then proceed. Here's an example of a project that I put together last year. I'm just going to talk about my time with Inktober 2024, which is actually part of what you're watching take place in the background here. So I decided my purpose was to, accomplish all 30 or 31 of the drawings for October, which if you haven't checked out Inktober, go check out some of my videos on that. It's a really cool thing, but we're not going to get into that today. So the goal was, first of all, just to complete all of the prompts, all of the drawings. I wanted to make sure I stuck to the prompts, even though sometimes, especially this year, they were a little bit more boring than normal. But that was kind of my purpose and goal. The secondary component was to try to make sure as many of the illustrations as possible could fit into a children's book that I'm trying to work on illustrating. So I wanted to focus on storytelling, making sure that I've got a lot of elements in there that can be alluded to, that could be kind of goofy or funny, things that would be interesting to children. The general, preparatory work was sitting down and sketching this little figure of the witch Andorra, going through all of these scenes and getting into hijinks and stuff like that. So I had to do a lot of sketching. It took a long time, probably 15 or 20 hours of sketching and researching and figuring out compositions and stuff like that. I didn't do all of that in one sitting though. I did a lot of prep work for the entirety of the project, and then before I would get into a piece, I would do some additional prep work. So don't be too discouraged by that. I told the Discord server that I was going to be doing this. I also talked about it on my YouTube channel and had some people in my life that I made sure were aware of this. This is, for me, some added accountability. It's harder for me to get away from something if I told people I'm going to do it. So I also started early and I gave myself 8 weeks to do the whole thing. This is, for some people, outside of the scope of the project because they think that it's supposed to just be done in October, thus the Inktober name. But because I record everything ahead of time and I often do really large pieces, I wanted to give myself some extra time. But that gives you a little bit of a rundown and an actual example of a project that I put together and then saw through to the end. So this might help you. It might be a little bit too abstract still, and it might be too finite, but hopefully this example helps kind of point you in the right direction. The next thing here is structuring a project. Once you have a decision made, or at least a compass to point you in the right direction, it's good to actually build the architecture to help you. I talked about this just a moment ago, obviously. This might sound dull or boring, but hear me out. Many artists live on the excitement and inspiration and motivation that comes randomly in a great gale force wind. But that, I am sorry to inform you, is simply not dependable. If you only work when the mood hits you, you will likely never accomplish what you want to as an artist. So, structure things, break down the process, all the pieces that need to be included, and write them down. Now, not every artist needs to do this. I know plenty of artists, in fact, many that I taught over the years, that this would, kind of induce like dry heaving or vomiting responses because the idea of planning everything out seems to lose so much of the joy. However, if you are in a position where starting projects is difficult for you, this might be a strategy that can really help you get through that. So if you're sitting there going, I want to do more projects, but I don't want to plan things, like maybe the reason that you haven't accomplished projects is the fact that you haven't planned things. If you're the personality type who doesn't need to plan things, maybe your situation's just a little bit different. Maybe you would have been doing them all along. I don't know. But artists are kind of complicated. Our brains work in weird ways. So if this isn't something that you've tried before, I would highly recommend it. But yeah, start with breaking down the processes, listing everything out. What needs to be sketched ahead of time? What kind of preparation are you going to need to do? Do you need to make sure every detail is worked out if you're putting together a comic? Do you need to make sure that every single page is lined out? Or is it okay just to have kind of thumbnails? Will that be sufficient? Can you use just small drawings and sketches, hashing out the composition? Is that going to be fine for your preparation? For some of these ink drawings, I've had really quick sketches. For some of them, like this one, I had a bunch of sketches and put a bunch of stuff together and then even sketched the piece out before I drew it. There was a lot of preparation for these. In fact, some of the big ones took hours of preparation before I then put 10 or 12 hours into finishing the piece. What needs to be researched? This is another thing to document. If you are going to have any manner of references or things that you don't understand, it's really good to get the research out of the way early. And this is also a good thing to have documented so you know what you're going to do. If you're anything like me, when you actually sit down to draw, the last thing you want to do is research something. So if I sit down to draw a snake and I haven't actually done any research or looked up any photos, I'm probably just going to go from memory and it's not going to be as good. Sometimes that's totally fine. But if you want to do research, just do the research ahead of time. Make sure that it's already taken care of. And you can make this a little bit easier by making sure everything is documented ahead of time. This goes into what you need references for. References and research can be the same. They can be distinct. References is obviously like the textures, the actual items you want to include, whereas research is going to be more like, what's the proper way to do this? How should I structure this? Do you need any new materials? There's nothing more frustrating than sitting down to make something and realizing you don't have the right color of paint. You don't have a pen. Your pencils aren't sharpened. You don't have an eraser. So try to think about what kind of supplies you're going to need. I find for me that the part of my brain that likes doing one part of this is very different than the part that likes to do the other. So if I can, ease the barrier to entry, make my life as easy as possible when it comes to time to sit down and actually work, it generally benefits me more. Are you working with anyone else? Do you need to coordinate anything? If you are doing this, it's going to make everything more complicated, but it can also make it a little bit more enjoyable. But just be aware of those aspects. And lastly here, what time frame is rational to accomplish what you've laid out? So you have an idea for a project, you've gone through, what needs to be sketched, researched, what do you have to gather references for? Do you need any new materials? All of these things. You should be able to get some rough estimate of how much time this project is going to take you. Don't decide you're going to do a series of 10 6x6 paintings and give yourself 2 weeks when you work full time. Make sure you give yourself some grace, especially as you're building out the first renditions of whatever this project is. You don't want to set yourself up for failure at the beginning. Some people can bear that and deal well with it, but a lot of us will hit that wall and just be like, oh, I'm done. Again, going back to Inktober 2024, I signed up to get the prompts a month early. So this was part of my preparation. I made sure that I was signed up for their emailing list so that I would have as much time to take a look at these prompts and get to work on them as possible. I wanted to make sure that I could record it and release stuff on time with the release of the actual prompt list to the public. But this was part of my research, part of my preparation for it. Even before I started getting into things like sketching. The next thing that I did was I wrote down all the prompts. I went through and began to figure out which of them I could group together. I wanted to make sure that a lot of the pieces that I did I could spend several days on them, which meant that I'd have to combine prompts or I'd have to do really small versions of them. I chose combining because I found it more interesting. I figured out how many total pieces it would be, and then I organized a schedule to get them done in the 8 weeks. Now, maybe this is overkill for you and your project, but again, we all have to kind of try and figure out where we fit in things. What works for us. This works really well for me. I love checklists. I love being able to mark things off a list. And I don't feel like this impedes my creativity at all. In fact, it means that I have allocated time to be creative. You might be different, but I would wager that you're not the exact opposite of me, that there's going to be some piece of this that's going to be beneficial for you as well. Then I started sketching out ideas, always making sure I had sketches for not just the next piece, but the one after that as well. So I hit no hard stops and I didn't have any stalls. This was preparation that I did specifically because in prior years, I would often finish a piece, feel really great about it, but have not thought at all about what the next one was going to be. So in order to kind of push that away, I made sure that I was always a couple pieces ahead as far as my thought process and my sketching. So this might be as simple as before I start on piece 1, I have piece 1, 2, and 3 all very much conceived. I finish piece 1, maybe piece 2, and then I start really thinking about pieces 4, 5, and 6. And then as the time went on, I would actually start doing prep for larger pieces that were further down the pipeline. This really helped me never hitting a point where it's like, well, crap, I don't know what to do. I finished this stage and I haven't thought about the next. The sketches were also not just one iteration. Often I would draw 2 or 3 really quick, like 5-minute drawings, just trying to figure out how I wanted to solve this problem. I very seldom go with my first idea because generally as humans, we come up with better ideas the more we think about something, the more we work on it. And then I began working on the pieces as early as I could and sharing results with the Discord server pretty often so that I could get some encouragement, feedback, and accountability. All of these are pieces of that process that has made it easier for me to stick to. So When you are structuring your project, I want you to try to think about all of these features, all the things that it has to have in order to make it function. You might not have a project that is anywhere near as detail oriented as something like Inktober, which is a challenge with prompts that you get ahead of time. Maybe it's just complete enough pieces to have a portfolio. Maybe it's actually completing pieces for a class. Maybe it's just getting 6 paintings done. Whatever it is though, if let's go with that for a second. Let's say that it was something as simple as I just want to complete 6 paintings. Like I haven't done a lot of painting in the last year or two. Okay. Sit down and start thinking about materials. What do you need? How big do you want to make these paintings? What do you want to make them of? As you chew on that for a little bit of time, if you come up with, 6 different animals or 6 different landscapes that you want to do, or maybe it's all the same subject matter, I would encourage you quickly to get into finding reference images so that whenever the mood strikes you or you decide that you're going to sit down and work on the sketching for or just beginning those paintings, you already have your references accumulated. I have several folders on my phone and on my computer that are specifically just references for painting. Because again, the piece of me that likes doing the reference finding is not the piece of me that likes working on the painting. I very seldom will go spend 20 minutes finding a good reference and then still be in the mood to paint. So when I want to paint, I want to pull up a reference and go, already have it accumulated. And I would reckon that a lot of you are similar, that the part of you that really wants to get into a piece is not the part that wants to sit down and do research. So try to do that research ahead of time. So you have your materials, you've picked out what you're going to paint, you maybe have done some quick sketches, maybe batch prime them, maybe go ahead and actually sketch out with paint loosely on them the figure of the animals or landscapes that you want to work on. And then you can look at them and go, well, how long does it take me to do a painting this size? Figure that out, multiply it, maybe add in the additional time space it would take to do an additional piece just to give yourself some grace, and then dive in. What about actually working on the project then? Which, everything we talked about for the last couple minutes segues in pretty nicely. So doing the actual work is easier once you have the structure built out. You may have found, as I certainly did for myself and my students over the years, that the work of researching is not the same as the work of sketching. I've alluded to this a little bit through this. The work of gathering references is not the same as actually putting ink to paper. Breaking these out into different categories and working on them one at a time, or bouncing back and forth from clearly designated arenas, will help you stay on top of the work itself. Part of the trouble with big projects is they often get out of hand quickly, and this can be prevented slightly by delineating each individual component as much as possible, breaking things out into their different checkboxes. The work of prepping something, researching something, doing the sketch on something, priming the back colors, they're all different things. And if you break those out and delineate them, you're often going to have a much better understanding of what you need to do to move through a project. For some projects like a large mural or painting, the vast majority of the work is actually just the craft of the piece. But the researching, sketching, and reference gathering should not be ignored. If, however, like the Inktober project I've been talking about here, your project is of many individual pieces, breaking it down and working through each individually is going to make your life far easier. Schedule time specifically. If you don't have dedicated time over the course of a week or a month, I would encourage you to do this, especially if you're working on a project. It's all well and good to just work when the mood strikes you, except that when you're trying to accomplish something large, the mood might not strike you for a long enough time, and you might find yourself just not completing things. So schedule your time. If you have a pretty consistent work schedule, or whatever your life is, it just allows you to schedule things consistently, I would block out a couple minutes every single day. Allow yourself to miss maybe 2 days a week to give yourself some grace. If you've got a schedule that doesn't allow that, try to set some time aside on the weekend. Maybe give yourself 2 hours or 3 hours a week to work on this specific thing. But whatever is going to work for your schedule, I would highly, highly encourage you to make sure that you have allocated time, scheduled time set aside. If you schedule time, if you put something on the calendar, it tends to happen at a much higher degree of regularity than something that is just spontaneous. Alongside this, give yourself deadlines. Be gracious with them, make sure they make sense, but give yourself them nonetheless. If you're bad at this or just inexperienced, then adjust them frequently at the beginning of the project. So if you think that you can do one painting every 3 days, for example, and you're going to do these 6 paintings, that would be 18 days. I would say give yourself 30 days. Initially I said add on an additional, pieces worth, but let's just go a little bit more excessive here. Maybe you haven't scheduled something like this in the past. If you think it should take you 18 days to do this, give yourself 30 days. And you'll probably find in the first couple days, like, oh goodness, that piece took me a little bit more time, or I'm right on the mark. But if it did take you more time and you need to reevaluate, you can do that early on in the project, and you're probably not going to mess with yourself too much. It's not going to eliminate your confidence about what you're able to accomplish. Track progress if it helps you. I love tracking my progress on things, but I know for some people this is just a mundane task that takes away from the moment. So know yourself well. If you like tracking things, if you like progress, if you like watching meters go up like in an RPG, it might be a good idea for you. Find a way to have some accountability as well, either in the form of sharing with people, rewarding yourself for steps completed, or something else that works for you personally. So whatever this looks like, I would encourage you to find a way to hold yourself accountable. I often share with people what I'm planning on doing, and because of the way that my brain is structured, if I tell someone I'm going to do something, then I have to do it. So I will often hesitate to tell anyone that I'm up to something, because when I mention it, then I feel like I really need to finish that thing. Like I feel awkward about the fact that I didn't finish my children's book this last year. I'm able to justify and convince myself that like, it's okay. I'm finishing a different book instead. And my brain is kind of being pulled too many directions. I'm hoping to get it done this year, but I'm also hoping to finish my second novel and the end of the trilogy by the end of this year as well. And that's taken a lot of extra time. So we'll see. But again, this goes back to giving yourself some grace. If you're holding yourself too accountable to where there's no joy in it, or it's irrational, you're not going to get anything done. And that's not real good either. Well, what about handling a project? The difficulties, the barriers that might pop up as you work on something. All of what we've talked about so far is all well and good, but reality is often far less simple, and difficulties are going to pop up. So what happens if you start to work on the project and your dreams kind of start cascading? Things are getting too big, you're taking on too much, there's scale creep in what you're working on. Well, this is part of the reason why writing down your project at the beginning, your goals for it, what your idea is, can be really beneficial. If you've started with this, I'm going to do 6 pieces, and or I'm going to do Inktober, and I'm going to do all these prompts, and suddenly you built it up into, well, I think I can do 6 pieces, but they're all 18 by 24, or I can do 8 pieces, or Inktober starts going into, I'm going to do a full page illustration for every prompt. The scale of your project has crept up a little bit, and it's good to go back, take a look at what you wrote down earlier, what your original assessment was, and just carry through on that. Yes, it can be exciting, and in the moment you can add additional things, but for your project's sanity, for your sanity as an artist, it's generally better to stick with what your original idea was. So try to keep your feelers out for anything like that happening. What if your expectations are unwieldy? They kind of get out of control. As you start to go into the project, you find that the quality of your pieces is not up to par, not up to what you desired initially. Well, this can be solved sometimes by doing additional research, additional preparation. If you neglected some of those steps, it can be really easy to just jump into things because you're excited, and then all of a sudden things get out of control. So even if that's not the case though, even if you've done adequate research, adequate preparation, sometimes you need to do more. So maybe pause on the project, give yourself an extra bonus day or two to kind of work on studying and figuring out how other people have solved these issues. Don't be arrogant. There's no problem in going and looking up videos and tutorials on like, how did somebody else solve this particular issue? We exist not in a vacuum as artists. And we have the ability now with the internet to see how hundreds, if not thousands of other people have done the same things we want to do. So go and research those things. Take a little bit of extra time and try to figure out how to pull those expectations back in, or how you can modify your scope and scale, or probably the most important is how you can learn from this experience and get a little bit better so you can reach higher expectations that you've set for yourself. What if you run into a lack of motivation? This one's hard. I think the first problem here is if you're depending on motivation, you are already in a bad position, because motivation is brutal and it is going to betray you. You cannot depend on motivation. You have to build and force your own motivation. You have to find things and tools to get you through whatever it is you want to do. I am not motivated to write my novel every day. I'm motivated to have my novel done. And that doesn't always translate to the daily rigors of, instead of playing video games, instead of, just hanging out and, resting on the couch, I'm going to go do my hour of writing. I'm not always motivated to do that, but I'm motivated by the long-term things. So maybe make sure that your motivations are tailored towards long-term things that you desire. It's a little bit easier to hold on to those, but also establish a schedule, routines, things that make it much, much easier to engage in your work so you don't have to rely on motivation. Likewise, if you find that you have a lack of inspiration, this can be solved sometimes in an easier fashion. Sometimes you can go and allow yourself to be immersed in things that do inspire you, but just make sure you're not wasting your time. If you are inspired by video games, it's probably a good idea to go spend a little bit of time in Elden Ring and kind of see how things are playing out. But be careful that you don't end up, doing a whole new playthrough rather than working on your art. Inspiration is also fickle, though. It is one of those things that is going to betray you. It is going to give you the illusion of being there for you, and it's going to abandon you in the middle of the night. So don't rely on inspiration. Harness it when it appears, but don't rely on it as a tool. But what about fear of failure or perfectionism? These two are often kind of hand in hand. Well, this is a part of making art. By making art, you are risking failure. Anytime you try to make anything, you are risking it not turning out. And perhaps the best thing here is to remind yourself that you're not going to get good at anything without failure. It is a natural part of the process. And again, maybe go back to some of your past works. Look at the things you have accomplished. Remind yourself of your current skill level and remind yourself why you're doing this. If you are so afraid of failure that you're not going to engage in a piece, it's going to keep you from ever making anything. So you're going to have to choose to figure out how to work on that. For me, it's just I would rather sit with a mountain of failed pieces than have never tried. When I get to my 50s or my 60s and I look back and go, I wrote my books, I made my children's book, I have thousands of art pieces I finished. Even if I look at those and I go, they never made me an ounce of money, it was stupid, I'm not that good a writer, I will be happy and satisfied that I accomplished those things. I am tired of having failure keep me from working, so I'm doing the work. If you can find a way to get yourself there, you will benefit from it tremendously. And it's hard. It is going to be a hard, psychological, introspective thing. There's not one quick way to do it. I know some of my closest friends who are working through perfectionism in counseling and therapy right now. And if that's you, I would encourage you to find that way to pursue it, to get some professional help to help you work through those things. But for me, in particular, I just don't want to have not done a thing. I want my books written. I want my pieces made. And I am unwilling to continue moving forward with my life without having done those things. So I've just committed to doing them. That's not going to work for everyone. But if fear of failure and perfectionism are keeping you from working, I would very strongly urge you to seek help in some way to start working through those issues, because they will hamstring you and keep you from doing the things that you love. So what about my personal thoughts and, updates and whatnot on this? Well, as you might have gathered from the entire podcast so far, I love projects, but mine often balloon in scale and become far too large for me. So I started writing the book. I say writing. I started world building the book that I'm working on right now when I was 12 years old. I have a copy of the original map that I drew when I was in 6th or 7th grade in the room beside me. And it was not good. I mean, obviously, as a kid, my ideas were not very well fleshed out. They weren't very well thought out. But it has been something that's been coalescing in my mind for a long time. And of course, as a kid, the idea of writing a novel and building a world or a video game was so tantalizing, but I wasn't up to the task. Over the years, I continued to build in bits and pieces, telling myself the stories, talking to other people about them, writing some things down, sketching things. And the scale of this world, which was initially a story I was going to tell, immediately grew into 3 books. And as I've been plugging away at it and working on it the last couple years pretty sincerely, it has gone into Oh, I basically have started writing the Silmarillion type of text for my novels, which is a lot like the book of Genesis in the Bible. I started with this idea of what is the creation myth that they tell themselves. It has ballooned dramatically. I've got 3 novels I'm working on right now, but I've got like the very basic outline for like another 13. So my projects often do this. They just expand grotesquely. And for me, I just have to eat my way through each thing individually. If I try to take all of it on or even just wrap my head around it, it's overwhelming and I won't do anything. So I have a word count every day for my novels that I try to accomplish. I have a set amount of drawings that I try to get done, some for the videos here, some for stuff at the gallery, some for just personal progress. I've got all these metrics, so I just try to get a certain amount of things done each day. And the nice part is, over time, when I stick to that, it all adds up, and it ends up being a tremendous amount that has been accomplished. Accountability is also a big helper for me. I don't want to be a liar, and that's what I feel like when I tell people I'm going to do something and I don't do it. So this extends into my artwork as well, and my writing. If I commit to doing something, I committed to doing 3 videos a week maybe a year and a half ago. I haven't missed one. You know, I took 1 week off for, not a week off, I took a video off for Christmas week this last year just because, you know, the year prior that video didn't do well. But that's the only time that I haven't done 3 videos over the course of the whole year. It's something I committed to do. You know, is somebody going to yell at me if I don't? Probably not. But I committed to do it, so I'm going to do it. So for me, accountability is a huge thing, and I try to make sure that if I say I'm going to do something, I actually do it. But that gives you just a little bit of insight into me. I tried over the course of this to kind of describe some of my personal stuff as well, but I would love to hear from you as to your large projects, how they're going, what they are, some strategies that have worked for you. If you're struggling, share that below too, and either I or some of our Discord members, I'm sure, can kind of take a look at that and see if they can give you some helpful feedback. Well, as always, thanks for being here. Thanks to my patrons who keep me afloat and help this to actually be able to happen. If you want to check out my Patreon, you can do that in the link below. It will give you access to, you know, some of the direction as to what we talk about on this channel, some exclusive content, and also just gives you the ability to support me if you like what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.